The macabre history of the ParkersA millionaire, paid to shelter 9 kids from the world. The summer of 1989 marked the beginning of what would later be recognized as one of the most sophisticated cases of child isolation in American history. While the nation celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall and the promise of a new decade, a secret transaction was taking place in the quiet hills of upstate New York that would condemn 9 children to lives of beautiful imprisonment for the next 15 years. The discovery of what came to be known as the Parker estate scandal emerged not through investigative journalism or law enforcement vigilance, but through a mundane bureaucratic error that exposed a web of financial arrangements designed to keep children hidden from the world. In March 2004, a routine audit of charitable tax deductions by the Internal Revenue Service flagged unusual patterns in the financial records of Vincent Ashworth, a millionaire who had made his fortune in early computer software development during the 1980s tech boom. Ashworth's tax returns showed substantial charitable contributions to an organization called the Children's Sanctuary Foundation, which claimed to operate residential facilities for at-risk youth. But when IRS investigator Linda Martinez attempted to verify these charitable deductions, she discovered that the foundation existed only on paper, with no publicly accessible facilities, no staff directories, and no documentation of the children it supposedly served. The foundation's listed address led to a rural estate in the Adirondack Mountains, a 500-acre property that had been purchased in 1987 by Harold and Margaret Parker, a middle-aged couple with no previous connection to child welfare work. Property records showed that the Parkers had acquired the estate through a complex financial arrangement that involved Ashworth's various business entities, but the exact nature of their relationship remained deliberately obscured through layers of legal documentation. Martinez's investigation revealed that Ashworth had been making monthly payments of $50,000 to the Parker estate since 1989, with additional annual lump sums that brought his total investment to over $8 million across 15 years. These payments were structured as charitable contributions, but they lacked the transparency and oversight typically required for legitimate, non-profit operations. When Martinez attempted to contact the Parkers directly, she encountered a level of legal protection that was unusual for a simple residential facility. The family was represented by a prestigious Manhattan law firm that specialized in privacy protection for wealthy clients, and all communications were filtered through attorneys who insisted that the estate was a private residence protected by constitutional guarantees of privacy and property rights. Martinez's bureaucratic instincts told her that something fundamental was wrong with the financial structure she was investigating. The amounts of money involved were far too large for a typical residential facility, and the complete absence of public documentation suggested an operation designed to avoid scrutiny rather than provide legitimate services. Her breakthrough came when she discovered building permits and construction records that revealed the true scope of the Parker estate's modifications. Between 1987 and 1989, the property had been extensively renovated to include residential dormitories, educational facilities, recreational areas, and security installations that transformed it from a private estate into what amounted to a self-contained institutional facility. The construction work had been conducted by specialized contractors who were bound by non-disclosure agreements and paid premium rates for their discretion. Workers who spoke anonymously to investigators described projects that included reinforced security perimeters, sophisticated communication systems, and residential quarters designed to house multiple children in dormitory-style arrangements. Most disturbing were reports of the security measures that had been installed during the renovation. The estate was surrounded by high walls disguised as decorative landscaping, equipped with electronic surveillance systems and monitored by professional security personnel who maintained 24-hour coverage of the perimeter. These measures went far beyond what would be necessary for a private residence or even a typical institutional facility. The construction workers also reported seeing children during the later phases of the renovation, describing groups of young people who appeared to be living on the property under strict supervision. The children seemed well cared for, but exhibited unusual behaviors that suggested intensive conditioning or training. They moved in organized groups, responded immediately to adult direction, and showed no curiosity about the construction activities taking place around them. When federal authorities finally obtained warrants to investigate the Parker estate in April 2004, they discovered a facility that challenged every assumption about residential childcare in modern America. The estate had been transformed into a completely self-sufficient compound where 9 children, now ranging in age from 15 to 24, had been living in total isolation from the outside world for their entire conscious lives. The children appeared physically healthy and were remarkably well educated, demonstrating advanced knowledge in multiple academic subjects and practical skills that exceeded what most conventionally raised children achieved. But they also displayed psychological characteristics that immediately alarmed the federal investigators and child welfare specialists who interviewed them. They had been conditioned to view the outside world as dangerous and corrupt, taught that they were being protected from influences that would damage their moral and intellectual development. They genuinely believed that their isolation was a privilege rather than a deprivation, and that the Parkers were benevolent guardians who had saved them from terrible fates in mainstream society. The children showed no desire to leave the estate or experience normal social interactions. They were comfortable with their structured existence and viewed the federal investigation as an unwelcome intrusion rather than a potential rescue. Their responses to questioning revealed a level of psychological conditioning that made conventional approaches to child welfare irrelevant. Dr. Patricia Williams, a federal psychologist brought in to assess the children's mental state, discovered that they had been systematically educated about the outside world, but in ways that emphasized its dangers and moral corruption. They had learned about technology, current events, and social developments, but always through the filter of interpretation provided by the Parkers and their educational staff. The children understood that a world existed beyond their estate, but they had been taught that this world was filled with violence, substance abuse, sexual exploitation, and spiritual corruption that would destroy their purity and potential if they were exposed to it. They viewed their isolation not as imprisonment, but as protection from contamination. More disturbing was the discovery that the children had been raised with no legal identity or connection to their biological families. None possessed birth certificates, social security numbers, or any documentation that would allow them to function independently in American society. They existed in a legal limbo that made their integration into mainstream life extremely problematic. Investigation into the children's backgrounds revealed that they had been acquired through a network of private adoption agencies, religious organizations, and social service providers who specialized in placing children with families willing to provide intensive care for troubled or special needs youth. In each case, substantial financial incentives had been provided to facilitate the placements, and follow-up supervision had been minimal or non-existent. The children had been carefully selected based on criteria that included intelligence, physical health, and family situations that made their disappearance unlikely to trigger intensive investigations. Most were described as orphans or children from families in crisis, individuals whose absence wouldn't immediately alert authorities or generate sustained searches. Harold and Margaret Parker, when finally interviewed by federal investigators, revealed themselves to be highly educated professionals who had been systematically recruited for their role as custodial guardians. Both held advanced degrees in child psychology and education, along with specialized training in institutional management and behavioral modification techniques. They genuinely believed they had been providing the children with opportunities and protection that wouldn't have been available in conventional foster care or institutional settings. The estate offered superior education, comprehensive health care, extensive recreational facilities, and a level of security and stability that exceeded what most American children experienced. But the Parkers also acknowledged that they had been operating under specific instructions from Ashworth regarding the children's education, socialization, and preparation for eventual roles in what he described as reformed society. The children were not simply being raised in isolation. They were being systematically prepared for purposes that remained deliberately vague, but clearly involved Ashworth's vision of future social organization. Financial records revealed that Ashworth's investment in the Parker estate was part of a larger pattern of similar operations that he had funded in multiple states. The Children's Sanctuary Foundation was one of several organizations he had established to channel money toward residential facilities that operated under similar models of complete isolation and intensive conditioning. The scope of Ashworth's child welfare investments suggested that the Parker estate was part of a coordinated effort to create multiple facilities where children could be raised according to his specifications, away from the influences of mainstream society and prepared for roles in some future social structure that existed primarily in his imagination. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the Parker operation had been technically legal throughout its 15-year existence. The children had been placed through legitimate agencies. The Parkers had maintained appropriate credentials as residential care providers, and the financial arrangements had been structured to comply with existing regulations governing charitable organizations and private residential facilities. Ashworth had exploited gaps in oversight and regulation to create a system that allowed him to essentially purchase children and subject them to whatever form of upbringing he desired, as long as their basic physical needs were met and they were not subjected to obvious abuse or neglect. The federal investigation revealed that child welfare systems designed to protect vulnerable youth could be manipulated by individuals with sufficient resources and legal sophistication to serve purposes that had nothing to do with the children's welfare or best interests. The 9 children who had spent their lives on the Parker estate found themselves facing a world they had been taught to fear, equipped with education and skills that were sophisticated, but not necessarily relevant to independent life in modern American society. They were intellectually advanced but socially isolated, emotionally stable but psychologically conditioned in ways that made integration extremely challenging. As federal authorities grappled with the complex questions raised by the Parker estate discovery, they realized they were confronting not just a case of unconventional child rearing, but a fundamental challenge to assumptions about childhood, education, and the role of wealth in determining children's life experiences. The beautiful imprisonment of the Parker estate had created children who were simultaneously privileged and deprived, educated and ignorant, protected and damaged in ways that defied conventional categories of child welfare assessment. The federal investigation that followed the discovery of the Parker estate would ultimately expose Vincent Ashworth as the architect of one of the most ambitious and disturbing social engineering projects in modern American history. FBI Special Agent Robert Chun, who led the investigation beginning in May 2004, uncovered evidence that Ashworth's child welfare operations were part of a decades-long effort to create what he believed would be a superior form of human society. Ashworth's personal papers, seized from his Manhattan penthouse and various corporate offices, revealed a worldview shaped by his enormous success in the early computer industry and his growing conviction that democratic society was fundamentally flawed and destined for collapse. He believed that human civilization required radical reorganization under the guidance of individuals who had been raised outside the corrupting influences of mainstream culture. The software fortune that had made Ashworth wealthy in the 1980s had also provided him with a perspective on human behavior that treated people as programmable systems whose development could be optimized. through proper environmental control. He viewed conventional child rearing as inefficient and contaminated by social influences that prevented individuals from reaching their full potential. Documents found in Ashworth's private files outlined his theory that children raised incompletely, controlled environments, isolated from the chaos and corruption of normal society, could develop capabilities far beyond those of conventionally raised individuals. These enhanced humans would eventually emerge to provide leadership for a reformed civilization based on rational principles rather than democratic chaos. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a federal psychologist brought in to analyze Ashworth's extensive research materials, discovered that his theories were influenced by a combination of technology industry thinking, historical examples of isolated communities, and pseudoscientific beliefs about human development that had no basis in legitimate child psychology research. Ashworth had convinced himself that he was conducting a humanitarian project that would ultimately benefit all of humanity by creating leaders capable of solving the problems that democratic societies seemed unable to address. He viewed the children in his care not as individuals with their own rights and interests, but as components in a larger social experiment designed to prove his theories about human potential. The Parker estate was revealed to be one of 7 similar facilities that Ashworth had established across the United States between 1987 and 1995. Each facility housed between 8 and 12 children who were being raised according to carefully designed protocols that emphasized intellectual development, emotional control, and psychological conditioning that would prepare them for leadership roles in Ashworth's envisioned future society. Agent Chun's investigation revealed that Ashworth had invested over $50 million in these facilities, employing dozens of specially trained staff members who shared his beliefs about the necessity of creating enhanced humans through controlled upbringing. The staff included psychologists, educators, medical professionals, and security specialists who had been recruited based on their willingness to participate in what Ashworth described as the most important social experiment in human history. Financial analysis showed that each facility operated on annual budgets that exceeded $2 million, providing the children with education, healthcare, and living conditions that surpassed what most American children experienced. But this investment came with the cost of complete isolation from normal social development and systematic conditioning designed to shape their personalities. According to Ashworth's specifications, the children were taught to view themselves as special individuals who had been selected and prepared for important roles in reforming human civilization. They received advanced education in science, mathematics, philosophy, and practical skills, but always within the context of Ashworth's ideology about the superiority of rationally organized society over democratic chaos. Dr. Martinez's analysis of the educational materials used in Ashworth's facilities revealed sophisticated psychological manipulation disguised as advanced learning. The children were systematically taught to distrust emotional responses, question democratic institutions, and view normal human relationships as obstacles to rational decision-making. They were being prepared to become technocratic leaders who would make decisions based on data and logic rather than popular opinion or emotional considerations. Ashworth believed that democracy was an inefficient form of social organization that prevented optimal solutions to human problems, and that future society should be managed by individuals who had been trained to think rationally without being influenced by the psychological weaknesses that affected normal people. The investigation revealed that several of the children who had been in Ashworth's facilities for extended periods showed intellectual capabilities that exceeded normal ranges, along with psychological characteristics that made them highly effective at analytical thinking and problem-solving tasks. But these enhancements had come at enormous cost to their emotional development and ability to form normal human relationships. Agent Chun discovered that Ashworth had been documenting the development of the children through detailed psychological assessments, academic testing, and behavioral analysis that treated them as experimental subjects rather than individuals deserving protection and care. The data he collected was used to refine his conditioning techniques and develop protocols for future facilities. Most disturbing was the evidence that Ashworth had been planning to significantly expand his operations. Documents found in his offices outlined plans for additional facilities in multiple countries with the goal of creating a global network of institutions that could produce thousands of enhanced individuals over the next several decades. Ashworth envisioned these enhanced humans eventually assuming leadership positions in government, business, science, and other fields where they could gradually implement the rational social organization he believed was necessary for human progress. He saw his project as a long-term investment in the future of human civilization, regardless of the cost to the individual children involved. Investigation also uncovered evidence that Ashworth had been working with researchers and theorists in other countries who shared his beliefs about the necessity of creating enhanced humans through controlled upbringing. His project was part of a broader international movement of wealthy individuals who believed that conventional democratic society was too chaotic and inefficient to address global challenges. But the most chilling discovery was that Ashworth's experiment had been partially successful. Several of the children who had spent their entire lives in his facilities displayed intellectual and analytical capabilities that exceeded normal human ranges, along with psychological characteristics that made them highly effective at leadership and decision-making tasks. However, these enhancements had been achieved through systematic denial of normal childhood experiences and emotional development. The children were intellectually superior but emotionally stunted, capable of rational analysis, but incapable of normal human empathy and connection. Dr. Martinez's psychological evaluations revealed that the enhanced children struggled with basic emotional expression, intimate relationships, and the kind of intuitive decision-making that characterizes healthy human development. They had been trained to view emotion as weakness and human connection as inefficiency, leaving them isolated even from each other despite their shared experiences. When federal authorities finally located and arrested Ashworth in his Swiss residence, he showed no remorse for his treatment of the children and continued to defend his project as necessary for the future of human civilization. He argued that the children had received superior education and care, and that their eventual contributions to society would justify whatever personal costs they had experienced. The legal challenges were enormous. Ashworth had violated numerous federal laws related to child welfare, but he had also created individuals whose capabilities exceeded normal human ranges, raising questions about their future integration into society. And the precedent in his case would set for other wealthy individuals who might attempt similar projects. The enhanced children could not be returned to normal foster care because their conditioning made them incompatible with conventional social development programs. But they also could not be allowed to remain in Ashworth's facilities because of the psychological damage that further conditioning might cause. Federal authorities ultimately placed the children in specialized transition programs designed to help them develop emotional skills and social connections while utilizing their intellectual capabilities in constructive ways. Some eventually integrated successfully into academic and professional environments, while others continued to struggle with the psychological legacy of their conditioning. Ashworth was convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to life in prison. But his case raised fundamental questions about the nature of childhood, education, and the rights of parents or guardians to raise children according to unconventional beliefs and methods. The Parker estate and other facilities in Ashworth's network were eventually closed and converted to other uses, but the children who had been raised there continued to live with the consequences of their unusual upbringing. They were living proof that human enhancement was possible through environmental control, but also evidence of the enormous psychological costs involved in such projects. The case led to significant reforms and oversight of private residential facilities and charitable organizations that work with children. New federal regulations required increased transparency and accountability for operations that receive substantial private funding and maintain unusual levels of isolation from public oversight. But the fundamental questions raised by Ashworth's project continue to resonate in debates about education, child welfare, and human enhancement. His experiment demonstrated that sufficient wealth could purchase the opportunity to conduct systematic psychological conditioning of children under the guise of providing superior care and education. The macabre history of the Parkers revealed that the greatest threats to children might not come from obvious abuse or neglect, but from well-funded ideologues who view childhood as raw material for their vision of human improvement. The beautiful imprisonment of the Parker estate had created children who were simultaneously privileged and damaged, educated and isolated, enhanced and diminished in ways that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Their story serves as a warning that the protection of children requires vigilance not only against traditional forms of harm, but also against those who would sacrifice individual childhood development for abstract theories about human potential and social organization. The 9 children who grew up behind the gilded walls of the Parker estate remain living reminders that the line between protection and imprisonment, between education and indoctrination, between enhancement and damage, can be far thinner than society prefers to believe. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on MW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,